The first bomb strikes the post office at 09:58 hours on February 19th, 1942. The bomb, a 250-kilogram Type 99 high-explosive weapon dropped from 8,000 feet, penetrates the building's roof and detonates in the main sorting room. The explosion kills 15 postal workers instantly and brings down the two-story structure in a cascade of brick and timber. Across Darwin Harbor, 188 aircraft from the Imperial Japanese Navy's First Air Fleet begin a coordinated attack that will sink 11 ships, destroy 33 aircraft, kill at least 243 people, and effectively remove Darwin from operational use for 6 months. The attack is larger than Pearl Harbor in aircraft committed and tonnage of bombs dropped. It is planned by the same officer, Commander Mitsuo Fuchida, who coordinated the Pearl Harbor strike. Australia has no warning. Darwin has no meaningful defense. This is not supposed to be possible. Darwin, while geographically exposed as Australia's northernmost port, operates as forward support base for Allied forces in the Netherlands East Indies. The port hosts merchant shipping, naval vessels, and supply operations. The airfield supports fighter and bomber squadrons. The town population of approximately 2,000 has swollen to over 10,000 with military personnel and civilian workers. The presence of Allied forces, particularly American ships and aircraft, should provide deterrent against major attack. Intelligence assessments rate Japanese carrier operations as unlikely this far south, given commitments elsewhere. The assessments prove catastrophically wrong. The Japanese First Air Fleet, the same carrier force that attacked Pearl Harbor on December 7, 1941, has operated continuously in the Pacific for 2 months. The force consists of 4 fleet carriers, Akagi, Kaga, Hiryu, and Soryu. These carriers, among the most powerful warships afloat, displace approximately 30,000 tons each and carry aircraft complements ranging from 63 to 73 planes. The combined force operates 188 aircraft for the Darwin raid, 81 Aichi D-3A Val dive bombers, 71 Mitsubishi A-6M0 fighters, and 36 Nakajima B-5N Kate-level bombers. This represents larger strike force than the 183 aircraft launched against Pearl Harbor. The tactical plan, developed by Commander Fuchida, emphasizes surprise and overwhelming force. The carriers, positioned approximately 220 nautical miles northwest of Darwin, launch aircraft at 08:45 hours. The strike force climbs to altitude and proceeds south in coordinated formations. The Zeros fly top cover at 12,000 feet. The Kates fly level bombing formation at 10,000 feet. The Vals follow in dive bombing groups at 8,000 feet. The formations maintain radio silence. Navigation relies on dead reckoning and visual landmarks. Weather conditions favor attack. Clear skies. Visibility exceeding 20 miles. Wind light from northeast. Darwin's warning system consists of visual observation posts, minimal radar capability, and radio communication with reconnaissance aircraft. The radar installation, a single COL set positioned at Paray, can detect aircraft at ranges up to 100 miles under ideal conditions. On February 19th, the radar operates intermittently due to maintenance issues. The visual observation posts rely on binoculars and telephone reports. The system can provide perhaps 10 to 15 minutes warning of approaching aircraft, assuming observers detect the attack force and communications function correctly. At 09:37 hours, Father John McGrath, a Catholic missionary operating a radio station on Bathurst Island, approximately 60 miles north of Darwin, transmits a warning message. McGrath observes a large formation of aircraft passing overhead proceeding south. He reports the formation as hostile based on aircraft type and formation discipline. The warning reaches Darwin at approximately 09:40 hours. Air raid sirens sound at 09:45 hours. 13 minutes remain before the first bombs fall. The 13 minutes prove insufficient for effective response. Fighter aircraft require 5 to 10 minutes to start engines, taxi, and take off. Most fighters are on the ground when the attack begins. Anti-aircraft guns require crews to man positions, load ammunition, and establish fire control solutions. Most guns are unmanned when the first wave arrives. Ships in harbor require time to raise steam, man battle stations, and prepare for action. Most ships remain at anchor, cruise at minimal manning levels when bombs begin falling. USS Peary, a Clemson-class destroyer, displacing 1,190 tons and mounting 4 4-inch guns, represents the most significant American warship in harbor. Peary has been operating in the Netherlands East Indies and arrived Darwin on February 15th for repairs and refueling. She anchors in the inner harbor near the commercial wharves. When air raid sirens sound, Peary's captain, Lieutenant Commander John Murray Birmingham, orders immediate preparations for getting underway. The crew races to raise steam and man battle stations. The process requires time the ship does not have. The attack develops in 2 phases. The first wave, arriving at 0958 hours, targets ships in the harbor and the commercial port facilities. The Cates and Vals attack in coordinated strikes, with Cates dropping bombs from medium altitude and Vals conducting steep diving attacks for precision. The Zero fighter strafe ships, port facilities, and defensive positions, suppressing anti-aircraft fire and creating additional damage. The attack emphasizes destruction of shipping and port capacity rather than terrorizing civilian population, though civilian casualties result from bombs striking populated areas. USS Peary receives focused attention from Japanese dive bombers. At least 5 Vals attack the destroyer simultaneously, diving from 8,000 feet and releasing bombs at approximately 2,000 feet before pulling out. The first bomb strikes Peary's forecastle at 0959 hours, penetrating the deck and detonating in the forward crew berthing compartment. The explosion kills 20 men and starts fires. The second bomb strikes amidships, destroying the after-engine room and killing the engineering watch. The third bomb strikes the stern, destroying the aftergun mount and rupturing the hull plating below the waterline. Peary returns fire with her 4-inch guns and 20mm anti-aircraft weapons. The guns, manned by crews working through the attack, engage the diving aircraft. The 4-inch guns fire approximately 30 rounds before ammunition supply is disrupted by damage and fires. The 20mm guns continue firing until their positions are destroyed or crews are killed. At 10:02 hours, a 4th bomb strikes Peary's bridge, killing Lieutenant Commander Birmingham and most of the bridge crew. At 10:03 hours, Peary capsizes and sinks. Approximately 90 crew members die with the ship. 40 survivors swim to shore or are rescued by small craft. The merchant ship MV Neptuna, a converted refrigeration ship carrying explosives and ammunition, anchors near the main wharf, Neptuna. Displacing approximately 6,000 tons and operated by civilian crew, has loaded depth charges and detonators in her holds. The cargo represents standard military supplies being transshipped to forward areas. The cargo also represents enormous explosive potential if the ship is hit. At 10:01 hours, a Vals bomb strikes Neptuna amidships. The bomb penetrates to the cargo hold containing depth charges. The detonation triggers sympathetic detonations from the depth charges. The resulting explosion effectively vaporizes the ship. The blast wave destroys the main wharf, damages or destroys buildings within 300 meters, and throws debris thousands of feet. A 2-ton section of Neptuna's hull lands 400 meters inland. The explosion creates a mushroom cloud visible from 50 miles. 45 crew members and dock workers die in the explosion. No identifiable remains are recovered. The explosion from Neptuna damages or destroys 6 additional vessels moored nearby. The Australian sloop HMAS Swan, the freighter Zealandia, the harbor vessel Barossa, and 3 smaller craft are sunk or damaged beyond repair. The cascading destruction from a single bomb hit demonstrates the vulnerability of ships carrying explosives in confined harbor areas. The Japanese targeting, whether through intelligence or random selection, achieves maximum damage by striking the most dangerous cargo present. The second phase of the attack begins at 10:15 hours. 54 land-based bombers from the Japanese Army Air Force's 3rd Air Group, operating from Ambon and Kendari in the occupied Netherlands East Indies, arrive over Darwin and attack the airfield and military installations. These bombers, primarily Mitsubishi G3M Nell and G4M Betty medium bombers, carry 500 kilogram and 250 kilogram bombs. The bombers attack in level formations from 12,000 feet, dropping bombs in patterns designed to crater runways and destroy parked aircraft. The Royal Australian Air Force maintains approximately 33 aircraft at Darwin on February 19th. The aircraft include 10 Lockheed Hudson bombers, 12 Curtiss P-40 Kitty Hawk fighters, and 11 consolidated PBY Catalina flying boats. Most aircraft are on the ground when the attack begins. 6 P-40 fighters manage to take off and engage the attackers. The remaining aircraft are destroyed on the ground by bombing and strafing. The 6 airborne P-40s, led by Flight Lieutenant Robert Oostreicher of the United States Army Air Forces, engage the Japanese formations. The fighters, outnumbered approximately 30-1. Attack the bomber formations and engage Zero escorts. U-Striker claims 2 Zeros destroyed. Other pilots claim additional victories. The Japanese claim shooting down all 6 defending fighters. Post-war analysis suggests 3 P-40s were shot down with pilots killed. 2 crash-landed with pilots surviving, and 1 landed safely after expending ammunition. The defenders achieved minimal impact on the attack, but demonstrate that resistance was attempted. The airfield runways received concentrated bombing. The G-3Ms and G-4Ms drop approximately 15,000 kilograms of bombs on the runway complex. The bombing creates numerous craters, damages taxiways, and destroys support facilities including hangars, fuel storage, and maintenance buildings. The damage renders the airfield unusable for operations. Repair requires weeks of work to fill craters, rebuild damaged surfaces, and restore support infrastructure. The civilian hospital, located approximately 1 kilometer from the airfield, suffers collateral damage. Several bombs intended for the airfield fall short, striking near the hospital. 1 bomb hits the hospital building directly, penetrating the roof and detonating in a patient ward. 13 patients and staff are killed. The hospital, Darwin's only significant medical facility, suffers damage that reduces capacity by approximately 50%. The reduced capacity creates problems for treating the casualties produced by the raid itself. The attack concludes at approximately 1100 hours. The Japanese aircraft withdraw to the northwest, forming up for return flight to their carriers or bases. The total duration of both attack phases is approximately 90 minutes from first bomb to last aircraft departing. In 90 minutes, the Japanese have dropped approximately 200 tons of bombs, sunk 11 ships, destroyed 33 aircraft, damaged port facilities and airfield beyond immediate use, and killed at least 243 people. The casualty count remains uncertain because many victims were vaporized in explosions or drowned when ships sank. The official count of 243 represents confirmed dead. The actual number likely exceeds 300. The Japanese losses are minimal. The attack forces lose 6 aircraft, 3 Zeros, 2 VALs, and 1 Kate. These losses result from anti-aircraft fire and fighter engagement. All aircraft losses occur in the first wave. The second wave, the land-based bombers, suffers no losses. Japanese aircrew casualties number 11 killed and 2 captured after being shot down. The loss rate, approximately 3%, is considered acceptable for the destruction achieved. Darwin's response to the attack demonstrates systematic failure of defensive planning. The warning system provided 13 minutes notice, insufficient for effective defensive measures. The radar operated intermittently and provided limited coverage. The fighter response managed 6 aircraft airborne from 33 available, an 82% failure rate. The anti-aircraft defenses, consisting of approximately 20 heavy and light guns, achieved minimal effectiveness with 6 aircraft claimed destroyed. The port facilities lacked adequate dispersion and protection for ships carrying dangerous cargoes. The hospital was positioned too close to military targets. The civilian population's response includes panic and disorder. Approximately half of Darwin's civilian population, over 5,000 people, flee the town in the hours and days following the attack. The evacuation, unorganized and chaotic, involves civilians loading possessions in vehicles and driving south on the single highway connecting Darwin to the rest of Australia. The highway, unpaved for much of its length, becomes congested with refugees. The evacuation creates administrative problems as civil authorities lose track of population and cannot organize reconstruction efforts. Military personnel's response includes instances of abandonment of duty. Some soldiers and sailors leave their posts during or immediately after the attack, fleeing into the bush or joining civilian evacuation. Courts-martial after the attack prosecute several dozen cases of desertion or abandonment of duty. The cases receive minimal publicity to avoid undermining morale. The sentences vary from reprimand to imprisonment. The desertion rate, while small in absolute numbers, indicates that some personnel concluded Darwin could not be defended, and preservation of their own lives took priority over duty. The Australian government's response emphasizes secrecy and minimization. Initial press releases describe the attack as minor raid with limited damage. Casualty figures are suppressed. The extent of shipping losses is classified. The civilian evacuation is described as prudent precautionary measure rather than panic. The information control aims to prevent Japanese propaganda victory and avoid undermining Australian public morale. The secrecy extends for decades. Full casualty figures and damage assessments are not declassified until the 1970s. The strategic consequences extend beyond immediate damage. Darwin, the only significant port in northern Australia and the primary support base for operations in the Netherlands East Indies, requires 6 months to restore to partial operational capacity. Ships avoid Darwin due to attack risk and inadequate facilities. Aircraft stage through alternative bases further south, accepting reduced range and increased transit time. Supply lines to Allied forces in the Indies become longer and more vulnerable. The Japanese gain operational breathing space to consolidate positions in the Indies without harassment from Darwin-based forces. The attack also affects Australian strategic psychology. Prior to February 19th, Australians generally viewed Japanese military capability as competent but not overwhelming. The Darwin raid demonstrates that Japan can project power to attack Australian territory with overwhelming force at times of their choosing. The psychological impact creates pressure on Australian government to recall Australian divisions serving in North Africa and the Middle East for home defense. The recall reduces Allied strength in the Mediterranean theater and creates tensions with British government, which opposes troop withdrawals. The long-term consequences include fundamental reassessment of Australian defence policy. The attack demonstrates that Australia cannot depend entirely on British or American forces for defence. Australia must develop indigenous defence capability, including larger Navy, Air Force, and Army. The policy shift, accelerated by Darwin raid, leads to expansion of Australian military forces, development of domestic defence industry, and reorientation of Australian strategic thinking towards self-reliance rather than dependence on distant allies. Commander Mitsuo Fuchida, who planned both Pearl Harbor and Darwin raids, describes the Darwin attack in post-war writings as more successful than Pearl Harbor in terms of destruction achieved relative to opposition encountered. Fuchida notes that Darwin's defenses, while theoretically adequate, failed to function effectively due to inadequate warning, poor coordination, and possibly deteriorated morale. He suggests that Darwin demonstrated the vulnerability of forward bases dependent on warning systems that can be evaded and defensive systems that require time to activate. The comparison between Pearl Harbor and Darwin reveals similarities and differences. Both attacks achieved surprise. Both employed carrier-based aircraft in coordinated strikes. Both targeted ships in harbor and aircraft on the ground. Both achieved objectives with minimal attacker losses. The differences include that Pearl Harbor targeted a fleet capable of offensive operations, while Darwin targeted logistics infrastructure. Pearl Harbor forced immediate American entry into war, while Darwin occurred after Australia was already engaged. Pearl Harbor is remembered as Day of Infamy, while Darwin remains obscure outside Australia. The obscurity of the Darwin raid in historical memory reflects several factors. The raid occurred during a period when Allied forces suffered defeats throughout the Pacific. Darwin was one disaster among many in early 1942. The Australian government's secrecy about casualties and damage prevented the raid from becoming widely known. The raid occurred in a remote location, affecting small population. No dramatic photographs captured the attack. The narrative lacks clear heroes or villains beyond the basic fact of Japanese attack and inadequate Allied defense. The survivors' testimony, recorded decades after the attack, describes chaos and terror. Civilian survivors describe watching ships explode in the harbor, seeing aircraft strafing streets, hiding in shelters while buildings collapsed from bomb hits. Military survivors describe trying to man defensive positions under attack, watching comrades die, feeling helpless against overwhelming force. The testimony consistently emphasizes the speed of the attack, the inadequacy of defenses, and the sense that Darwin was unprepared despite being forward base in a war zone. The investigation conducted after the attack by Australian military authorities identifies multiple failures. Warning systems inadequate. Fighter response insufficient. Anti-aircraft defenses ineffective. Port facilities too concentrated. Civilian evacuation planning absent. Command and control inadequate. The investigation results in personnel changes, revised defensive procedures, and increased resources allocated to northern defense. The changes come too late to prevent the attack, but aim to prevent recurrence. The recurrence never happens. The Japanese conduct 63 additional air raids on Darwin between March 1942 and November 1943, but none approach the scale of February 19th attack. The subsequent raids employ land-based aircraft rather than carrier forces. target specific facilities rather than general destruction, and encounter improving defenses as Australian forces strengthen anti-aircraft capabilities and fighter squadrons. The cumulative damage from 63 smaller raids approximates the damage from the single large raid on February 19th. The Japanese never again commit carrier forces to attack Darwin. Considering the risk versus reward unfavorable compared to operations elsewhere, the First Air Fleet, after the Darwin raid, proceeds to attack shipping in the Indian Ocean, then returns to Japan for refit before deploying to the Coral Sea and Midway operations. The carriers Akagi, Kaga, Hiryu, and Soryu, which devastated Darwin, will be sunk at Midway in June 1942. The aircraft crews who attacked Darwin, the most experienced naval aviators in the Japanese Navy, will mostly die in the Midway battle or subsequent operations. The overwhelming superiority demonstrated at Darwin, where Japanese forces faced minimal opposition and achieved total victory, will not prevent these same forces from suffering catastrophic defeat when facing prepared American defenses 4 months later. The ships sunk at Darwin remain on the harbor bottom. Some wrecks were salvaged after the war. Others remain as underwater hazards marked on navigation charts. USS Peary's wreck sits in approximately 15 meters of water. The destroyer's remains have deteriorated from corrosion and marine growth. The wreck was surveyed in 2008 using sonar and underwater cameras. The survey documented the damage and current condition. The wreck is declared war grave and protected from disturbance. Approximately 90 American sailors remain entombed in the wreck. Their bodies never recovered. The Neptuna explosion site, now called Stokes Hill Wharf, was rebuilt after the war. The wharf serves commercial shipping and cruise vessels. A memorial plaque describes the explosion and lists the dead. Visitors walking the wharf have no indication of the violence that occurred there beyond the plaque. The crater created by the explosion was filled during reconstruction. Fragments of Neptuna, scattered across Darwin, occasionally surface during construction projects. The fragments, twisted metal pieces bearing traces of paint and corrosion, are collected by museums or private collectors. The Darwin Military Museum, established in 1969, preserves artifacts and documentation from the raid. The collection includes bomb fragments, aircraft wreckage, photographs, and personal items from casualties. The museum provides educational programs about the raid and its context. The programs emphasize that Darwin was attacked repeatedly, not just on February 19th, and that the raids formed part of larger Japanese strategy to isolate Australia and prevent Allied operations from northern bases. The commemoration of the raid occurs annually on February 19th with memorial services at the cenotaph and wreck sites. The services, attended by diminishing numbers of survivors and growing numbers of descendants, remember the dead and acknowledge the historical significance. The services also recognize that the raid, while devastating to Darwin, did not achieve strategic objectives of forcing Australia out of the war or preventing Allied operations in the Southwest Pacific. Darwin recovered. Allied operations continued. The war proceeded. The tactical lessons from the raid entered Allied defensive planning. Forward bases required better warning systems, dispersed facilities, adequate fighter defense, and realistic casualty evacuation planning. The lessons seem obvious in retrospect but required the disaster at Darwin to compel implementation. Subsequent Allied bases in the Pacific incorporated these lessons. The bases remained vulnerable to attack but demonstrated greater resilience when attacked. The human cost, at least 243 dead with actual number likely higher, represents tragedy compounded by inadequate preparation. The dead included military personnel who died fighting hopeless defensive battle, merchant seamen who died on ships unable to defend themselves, civilian workers who died at wrong place and wrong time, hospital patients who died in beds when bombs struck their ward. The deaths were not heroic or meaningful in traditional sense. They resulted from being present when superior force attacked inadequately defended location. The deaths changed nothing strategically but ended individual lives completely. The memorial at Darwin lists names where known. Many entries read unknown or unidentified remains because explosions and fires prevented identification. The names represent individuals with histories, families, plans that ended on February 19th, 1942. The memorial presents the names without commentary, allowing visitors to supply their own interpretation of what the names represent. Some see heroes who died defending Australia. Others see victims of strategic miscalculation and inadequate defensive planning. The names themselves are neutral, simply marking deaths that occurred The comparison to Pearl Harbor continues to generate discussion in Australia. Some argue that Darwin deserves equal recognition to Pearl Harbor as major attack on Allied territory in opening phase of Pacific War. Others note that Darwin's strategic significance was less than Pearl Harbor, and casualties were fewer. The debate misses that both attacks demonstrated similar tactical principles. Surprise attack achieves maximum effect when defenses are unprepared. Carrier aviation can project overwhelming power at distance, and warning systems must function reliably or defense fails. The essential fact remains that on February 19, 1942, Darwin was attacked by the same Japanese carrier force that attacked Pearl Harbor 10 weeks earlier. The attack sank 11 ships, destroyed 33 aircraft, killed at least 243 people, and removed Darwin from effective operational use for 6 months. The attack was larger in aircraft committed than Pearl Harbor. The attack achieved its tactical objectives completely. The defenders were overwhelmed. The town was devastated. The strategic consequences extended through the war. The attack also demonstrated limits of what tactical success can achieve without strategic follow-through. The Japanese never exploited the damage to Darwin through invasion or sustained campaign against northern Australia. The carriers withdrew to other operations. Darwin rebuilt. Allied operations adapted. The attack became a historical event rather than strategic turning point. The carriers that struck Darwin with overwhelming force would be destroyed at Midway. The experienced aircrew would be killed in attrition battles. The tactical superiority demonstrated at Darwin would not prevent strategic defeat. The survivors carried memories for life. The civilians who fled Darwin, the soldiers who manned inadequate defenses, the sailors who swam from sinking ships, the pilots who flew against impossible odds, all lived with knowledge of what occurred on February 19th. Some spoke about the experience. Others refused, finding the memories too painful. The memories died with them. What remains is documentation, official reports, casualty lists, damage assessments, investigation findings. The documentation describes what happened without capturing what it meant to experience overwhelming attack from superior force with no realistic hope of defense. That is the complete story of the raid on Darwin. Australia's forward base attacked by Japanese carrier force using overwhelming superiority against inadequate defenses, achieving total tactical victory, sinking ships, destroying aircraft, killing hundreds, creating chaos and panic, then withdrawing having accomplished tactical objectives without strategic follow-through. The attack demonstrated what carrier aviation could achieve against unprepared opposition. It demonstrated that Australian territory was vulnerable to attack. It demonstrated that warning systems and defensive capabilities must function or disaster results. All these demonstrations required death and destruction to compel recognition. Darwin paid the cost in ships sunk, buildings destroyed, and lives ended. The lessons were learned. The dead remained dead. The attack entered history as largest foreign attack on Australian soil, remembered primarily in Australia, obscure elsewhere. Significant for what it revealed about vulnerability and resilience. Devastating in immediate impact. Limited in long-term consequences. Documented completely. Understood imperfectly. Commemorated annually by those who remember or choose to remember that on February 19, 1942, 188 Japanese aircraft attacked Darwin and for 90 minutes faced minimal opposition while destroying military and civilian targets systematically before withdrawing, having achieved every tactical objective they pursued.